Hey everyone, in this episode, I'm joined by Rory Mullins. Rory is the former TA director at TransferGo and the Trainline, and before that, recruiting leader at Wise and Uber. In this episode, he teaches how he and his small team were able to make an insane amount of hires in a 12-month period. He also teaches recruiters how they can continue to accelerate their career and make themselves more important to the businesses they work for going forward. Let's get into it. I want to start off with a stat you shared with me in the prep call because it blew my mind a little bit. And that was in your last role, you were able to make 165 hires across 3 people in your team in a 12-month period. I think that's amazing given the time we're in, right? Like we're hearing more about doing more with less and efficiency in TA. So what can you share with us about how you achieved that?
Yeah, thank you for that. I think it was more than 167. I worked it out the other day. It actually came up to about 182 across the 12-month period. I think without being too blunt about it, it is about stripping away a lot of the extracurricular pieces. When you've got a small team and you've got a large-ish, and look, 180 odd hires in 12 months is not a huge number for a company to absorb, but it's a big number for 4 people to deliver. And there was 3 of us in total. So firstly, it's all hands on deck, right? So all 3 of us, hiring myself included. So therefore you strip away any ego on my part. So you're kind of very directly involved. Ensuring the team were really clear around the functions they were supporting. You kind of in a smaller team end up being a bit of a generalist recruiter, but it's helpful if you can have a focus or you can have functions that you partner with. So we spent a bit of time the early outset making sure that the team were really clear on pitch. They were really clear on how we were sourcing, where we were sourcing, who we were sourcing. So almost setting the team up for success from the outset. And we kind of pulled away a lot of the vanity projects. We didn't do a huge amount of work on employer brand in that period of time. We didn't get to work on the DEI work that we probably would have liked to have worked on. So I think there's parts of the function that suffer when you have a small team that have to deliver. But I think if you can pull them away and give yourself space to really focus on what you were trying to deliver. We worked cleverly on automation, not crazy automation, but automation from an interview note-taking point of view, automation from an outreach perspective where we could, automation within the ATS. So just ensuring that every area that we could carve and shave 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 30 minutes, an hour, whatever it was, we would find that edge and then make sure that we capitalize on it, which was really, really important. And then a lot of it came back down to basics, really, really focusing on the intake. So I think a lot of TA leaders will say this, but a lot of teams actually in recruitment are often order takers. Not very good at asking kind of deeper probing questions in terms of understanding what does the business actually want to hire. So myself and the team probably put an inordinate amount of extra time into understanding what each function was looking to build, what they wanted to hire, who they wanted to bring into the business, and what impact that person was going to have. So again, that starts looping back to the pitch and how we're selling the role, how we're selling the story of the company that you're joining. But that intake then started to become quite integral to shortlisting. When I say shortlisting, not in the traditional sense, we weren't presenting CVs, we were putting people straight into diaries for interview post-screening with the TA team. But the intake fed that. So we didn't have a lot of wastage. So again, candidates that reached the business were the right candidates. Or we said no to a lot of people at the outset. So we didn't waste time with the business interviewing. And we used ourselves very much as a gate to get through that. Closing then became a huge part of it. So we were closing at about 96, 97% close rate or acceptance rate. So again, you're not losing a lot of candidates at the end of the funnel. So again, it's all these little efficiencies that you're pulling in at the right times. AI where we needed it. Again, scheduling is a really key part of that, and note taking was important. And that really was it. There isn't a secret sauce to it. I think it's a lot of hard work. There's some lucky bits in there as well, right? We had a certain number of roles that would have fallen into easier to hire categories where we were able to volume hire. We had a number of roles where we could bring 5 or 6 people into the same function at the same time. So you're kind of starting to do bulk hiring into certain functions. So that helped. But we were just super, super clear on what the team could deliver, what they would deliver. And we still pulled in a few different things. We redesigned our career site. We worked on our EVP. We delivered recruitment data that hadn't necessarily been picked on previously. So there was some nice wins in there that elevated the TA function. But ultimately, it just became an obsession around delivery. And that was, I think, our kind of USP as a team.
I like the way you mentioned that there is an opportunity cost to doing this at the start, right? And I wonder how often do we communicate that to the business as a TA function? Like, yes, we can increase how many hires per month, per quarter we make, but there will be a cost to doing that with the current amount of capability and capacity we have, right? Like, it will be potentially of a detriment to our DEI strategy or employer brands effort. So that was super interesting. Another thing you mentioned was tracking your time, like where can we save 30 and 60 minutes? And again, I wonder how many recruitment functions are actually fully aware of where they're spending all the time. And you've been part of bigger TA orgs and teams before, right? Are there areas you've seen maybe when you're not working as efficiently where recruiters are often wasting a lot of time?
Be careful what I say on that one. There's a tendency for recruiters after the first 2 to 3 years, particularly in larger TA functions, to want to dovetail into more project-based work. And I think it's admirable, it's important, and it's certainly a huge part of that individual's development. But I have witnessed at times that take away from the day job. And the day job ultimately in recruitment and TA is still to deliver hires. That is the most important part of your job. If what you're working on from a project point of view helps elevate that, it improves the quality, it improves the quantity, it improves speed, then fantastic. And I think there are times when people just get pulled in different directions. And I think that's good because that may be where they want to go in their career. But I think the larger the TA team, sometimes the more likely it is you are going to start seeing people pulled in different directions. And that's where you start to see some wasted.
A few folks who are listening to this will be at scaling companies, maybe even hyperscaling companies, which you're at in your last role, and probably some of the other companies you've been at before, right? How do you manage these quite aggressive rec loads with still maintaining like yourself and TA as a strategic function?
Be clear on a few things. One, I think coming back to you kind of reiterated that trade-off point. I think that tells a story in itself that as a leader, you need to be strong on communication. You need to invest a huge amount of time with senior management, C team, in understanding their pain points, understanding their needs, and understanding where they see the recruitment life cycle within their function. And then you can take that and then you can build a strategy on the back of that. But if you don't invest time early and understanding what it is that, and we're great at interviewing people, so we should be great at interviewing stakeholders, right? We should be really good at clear at understanding what their issue is and what their challenges are, and then being able to tailor the TA team back to deliver against that. And then being clear with, you can have A, but if you want A, then you might not get B. So we're going to downgrade that today, but we'll promote that. And I worry less about workload, funnily enough. I think we sometimes get a little bit too stressed or stretched by the number of vacancies that are open at a given time. I like to think much more clearly around 12 to 18 months in advance. Where have we promised the business we'll get you to? So 300 hires, 400 hires, we're going to increase the business by 20% or whatever that is. And then start to work backwards. And then we start to think around quarterly and monthly output per recruiter. And then that becomes a much easier story because then you start to talk about capacity and then you can model on that capacity. And then that helps you to kind of shape what the TA team will look like. And that also then interestingly gives you a much clearer story to bring back to the finance team when you start to ask for agency support, whether you want to ask for embedded support or you want to ask for more permanent headcount. So that's where you start to be able to tell that story. And I think as a leader, your job is to remove that stress from your recruiters. And that's why I like to focus on output rather than the total number of recs, the kind of big mountain that you need to chip into. If you're a tech recruiter, give me 3 engineers a month, that you're doing your job really, really well at that point. We'll worry about everything else after that.
How do you see that changing with more tech and automation? Is it as simple in your mind as the capacity for each recruiter goes up a little bit as we add this automation in, or is there more complexity than that?
Theoretically, it should see an increase in capacity. There's an argument that says we don't necessarily need an increase in capacity at times, and what we often need is an increase in quality. And it's where I see this advantage coming from the tech side is that it's going to put us in this place where recruiters can focus a lot more on that stakeholder engagement piece. They can focus a lot more in terms of understanding what their function or business needs and requires. I think they can embed themselves a lot more effectively within the teams that they support. And on the inverse side, then you end up actually doing a little bit more project work and you get a bit more space. Because we can increase capacity, and maybe that means we have smaller teams. That has its positives and it has its negatives. Or you can increase quality. So you make the same number of hires, because ultimately your business can only onboard a certain number of people at the same time. But maybe it gives you a bit more time to be smarter about the individuals you bring in.
Makes sense. I love the idea of future recruiters being like having the time to become incredibly well enabled on the business unit they're recruiting for and elevating themselves as individual business partners. I think would be awesome.
I think there's a piece on that. And I think it's almost like, it sounds quite weird to say, but when I used to work in agency, you had the concept of having a sourcer that worked with you. And, if you were really experienced, you maybe got two sourcers. And I kind of see AI as being that piece for the in-house recruiter now. The more experience you get, why don't I give you two agentic AIs to help you support? And therefore you're managing and controlling bigger funnels, faster moving funnels. And you're getting a lot more space and time to have much more strategic business conversations about who and what we're hiring into the business.
Do you have any like feel for what a future org chart might look like in TA? Will it be a TA leader into TA managers into AI agents? What do you think that might look like?
I think the days of 100+ TA functions are over. I think where we are now is TA leader with a lean leadership team reporting to them. And this really depends on the size of the org. So it could be it's a set of senior recruiters, supported by AI, or it's a team of managers or leads with a layer of recruiters and then AI supporting and feeding in there. And essentially AI for me will feed the funnel. It'll assess, it will qualify individuals. And I think it'll give us smarter metrics back in terms of how our funnels are performing. But recruiters are still driving the human element at the top of the funnel. So there's still, for me, there's still an element of recruiter screening. I don't see AI closing people. I don't see AI understanding the candidate wants and needs in the same way. And I don't think yet it's going to pitch your company for you effectively. I think your recruiters still need to do that. But definitely leaner teams.
Yeah, I'd agree. Cool. Let's jump back to the present for a second. We spoke in the prep call. I think you got a passion for mentoring and helping ICs develop in TA. What kind of top tips do you have for ICs to, I guess, maybe continue to develop in their role after they've been in TA for 3, 4, 5 years?
Find a way to make yourself indispensable. I say that slightly tongue in cheek, but given the conversation we've just had, that doubling down in becoming a true business partner and understanding the business that you support, you almost have to never lose that curiosity in terms of asking questions. Why are we making that hiring decision? Why are we building that team over here? What impact will that team have? And that eagerness and willingness to learn and to get really embedded. It's funny, I met a recruiter recently and I asked them to pitch me the company that they worked for and they couldn't do it. And they'd been there 3 years. Like that for me is just the height of recruitment laziness, right? Understand the company you're working for. And I think that for me, and that curiosity, that willingness to learn, that willingness to ask questions, and to turn that into something that we can pitch externally, I think makes IC recruiters stand out. And in terms of development, I think take on the right projects. And one thing I say to a lot of ICs that I work with now is to get them to focus on picking one thing they're going to win on in a quarter. To one big thing that's going to move the needle and that's going to become noticeable. I think recruiters are very good at telling you how many hires they made, but they're not necessarily very good at telling you the influence they had on a particular metric that the hiring team or the functional leader or the C team were interested in. And I think have that desire to be able to pick up a clear understanding of metrics, of data, but telling a story with that data becomes really important for that individual's development and take on more challenges. I think, again, that comes back to the curiosity piece. That really makes a difference.
What would be a good example of that? The part you just mentioned about picking a metric which is important to a hiring team outside of hires. What would be a good example of that?
I mean, obviously, there is the obvious ones. There's time to hire, there's time to fail, but I think it's probably a case of sitting with the hiring teams and understanding where the biggest challenge for them is. And I see oftentimes the thing that they're most interested in or they're most passionate about is how can they spend less time interviewing? So getting into the hiring team and understanding more deeply around why they're saying no to people, then going back to creating more efficiency that then creates less interview workload for that team. That's where you're going to win and that's where they're going to love you. So sometimes that comes back to the intake. Sometimes that comes back to screening. Sometimes it comes back to actually that function doesn't understand what it is they wanted to hire in the first place. And we can, as TA, can really help that. And I think if I was an IC recruiter, I would start to have a deep-seated obsession with the team that I was supporting because I know that's what would get me ahead.
Yeah, it was a really nice mini course we have on Purple actually with Luke Victor, and he teaches how you do that exact process you were just talking about, where you look at reasons why candidates are failing, second, third stage interview, pick the most common failure reasons, feedback back into your screening, let people go through the process, and then you create this continuous cycle of improvement, right? Which might not improve your time to hire, but will certainly mean you have to put less candidates in at the top of the funnel.
But I think it's even little things like finding scheduling improvements. I think there's a lot of back and forth with coordinators of recruiters and when's your diary free, when's your diary open. And little things that I've done in the past. We did this at Uber, we did this at Wise. Free book space. You're a senior engineer, you're going to interview 4 people a month, 5 people a month, but I'm going to put those slots in your diary and then it's my job to fill them. And if I don't fill them, you get that time back, but I'm not going to chop and change your diary. So you start to become really efficient and you help them be more efficient with their time. So there isn't a last minute interview dropped into an engineer's diary. They know I'm interviewing 2 people in a week's time and I need to clear that space and I need to clear the hour before and the hour after because my brain isn't going to work after the interview. So I need to clear my head a little bit before I start coding again. And I think that even those little things can make a huge difference in terms of your reputation with those hiring teams.
Awesome. Final question for you, Rory. If you could only be looking at one area to upskill in, or if you could only be looking at one tech to maybe consider or upskill yourself in, what would that be right now?
The area that I'm spending probably the most time researching is the piece around agentic AI and understanding how that is going to make my teams more efficient. And I would quite happily invest hours on end playing with tools to figure out what the best one is. That for me is going to be the fundamental game changer over the next 12 to 18 months for TA functions. So that's probably the area I'm most interested in.
Awesome. I think it's a great answer. Thanks so much for joining us.
So thank you.